The tusks, the curved, nasty teeth, that snout, inches from my face. The pig was going to rip my face open. The pig was going to kill me. Christopher swung his stick like a club. It slammed down on the pig's spine. The pig grunted, shoved its face closer to mine. I cried out. No words, just a desperate, scared wailing sound. Christopher stabbed at the pig. Nothing. But then, quite calmly, the pig climbed down off me. It trotted about 6 steps, then paused, turned, and looked at us with amused contempt. Then the pig said, "Give me your apples. Give me your apples, or I'll gut you, one by one." We gave him our apples. Just another day in Everworld. I swear to God, if the pig starts singing Hakuna Matata, we are canceling Everworld. I will turn this Everworld around, young man, and now everyone doesn't get Everworld. No Hakuna Matata!
I looked into your eyes and saw a world that does not exist. I looked into your eyes and saw a world I wish I was
Three narrators down, 1 to go. Psst, nobody tell him about the surprise 5th narrator. This time we're seeing things from the perspective of Jalil. While a bit colder than April, Jalil hasn't expressed the gross masculine hang-ups of David and Christopher. He really doesn't take shit from the rest of the team, be it David's hero complex, Christopher's blatant racism, or April's spiritual blinders. In short, he's in need of his main capital F flaw, the major personal obstacle that he'll have to overcome over the course of the series. And boy howdy does Everworld number 4, Realm of the Reaper, waste no time in getting to that point. This is literally the first couple of paragraphs in the book. I washed my hands, stood at my sink in the bathroom I use, the one down the hall, upstairs, my bathroom, my sink, and washed my hands. Over there, in Everworld, I was asleep. Over there, I had just fallen to the ground out in the open, the soggy fire barely warming the parts of me that were closest to it, not touching the far side of me. Over there, I had glanced at David. He had first watch. He always had first watch. Then laid down on damp ground, on what few twigs and grasses I could assemble into a laughable bed, and then fallen asleep. Over there in Everworld, I was filthy. Over there, my body crawled with the fleas, lice, and ticks I'd pick up during our last indoor night's sleep. Here in the real world, I finished washing my hands, turned off the faucet, put down the soap, tried to walk away. Told myself I could walk away. Of course I could walk away. I began washing my hands again. Jalil has obsessive-compulsive disorder. More specifically, he has obsessive-compulsive disorder in the real world, with detailed bathroom rituals and keeping all his pencils at the exact right length and all that. But when he's in Everworld, the compulsion is gone. He's fine being dirty and grimy. The reason for this is speculated on but not confirmed. Obviously something to do with the magical nature of Everworld. But whether erasing a specific mental disorder is somehow part of the fabric of this universe, or something more specific and aimed at Jalil, is unclear. This ties into Jalil's connection to Sena. Sena's connections to the other 3 members of the team are made clear pretty early on. David was Sena's current boyfriend, Christopher her ex, and April her sister. Jalil didn't have an obvious tie to Sena, but here we learn that she had approached him before in private. We get this flashback of Sena and Jalil meeting at school later in the book. "I can help you, Jalil." Another step. "It's an act of faith, Jalil." That stopped me like a slap in the face. I don't do faith. You must have faith in something. I shook my head. If you have knowledge, you don't need faith. Something I'd said before. She cocked her head, amused. "Ah, one of those. You want proof." I nodded, uncertain. I still wanted to touch her. Wanted her to insist that I touch her. Wanted. She was going to walk away. No, she wasn't. Why? I'll make a deal with you, Jalil. A trade. A step for a step. She moved toward me. So close now. I stepped. Inches. I could feel her breath against my face. I will take the need from you, she whispered. I can give you peace. I can release you. Only touch me. Where? She smiled. I reached out my hand, and as I reached, I trembled, and as I reached, I fought within myself. Told myself it was all stupid. Told myself it was okay. I was merely putting her claim to the test. My fingers met resistance. And oh, it was gone. Gone! The need all gone. The nagging, insane voice that urged me, always controlled me, that never silenced, never satisfied voice was gone. Sana was able to relieve Jalil of his OCD temporarily, forming a silent pact between them. Basically, Sana was a drug dealer, and mental stability was the drug she was selling. Jalil came when Sana called the four of them because it was time to pay up. So the question now is this a good portrayal of OCD? I honestly don't know. I have no first-hand experience with OCD and only have some basic understandings of it as a recognized mental disorder. I don't think listening to Howie Mandel interviews makes me an authority here. As best as I can tell, there is nothing egregious with how OCD is portrayed in this story. The book opts for some basic symptoms like ritual hand-washing, and doesn't make it the only defining characteristic for Jalil's character. That said, if you have OCD, or you're in the field of mental health, and see something wrong with how Everworld tackles the topic, I am very open to hearing from you. So at the end of the last book, our protagonist finally had a proper goal to work towards besides staying alive, stopping a massive immigration of old gods to our world. Unfortunately, they don't know the first thing in doing that. They know that Sana is the key between Everworld and the real world. They know that the alien god Ka-Anor is the reason why all the old gods want to escape. But they're just four dirty, hungry teenagers with one half-decent sword and a pocket knife tempered by alien metals. These losers don't even have morphing powers. This is the first time an Everworld book hasn't immediately preceded the previous one. Some time has passed since Galahad's death, and our four protagonists haven't been able to do anything but wander around, go to small villages, and act like minstrels for food. Any attempts to go beyond that, to do anything dramatic or exciting, just results in them falling on their face. They see a boar and are like, "Hey, we're hungry, let's kill and eat that boar," and they proceed to get their asses handed to them by said boar, who also turns out to be a magic talking boar who nicks their food. They see a nicely constructed bridge across a river and think, well, that bridge looks out of place in this gritty medieval hellhole, it must be a trap. So they try to wade the river, nearly drown, and all their stuff is soaked and most of it ruined. And the bridge wasn't a trap at all. There was just a really passionate carpenter somewhere in Everworld, and these snotty kids don't know fine art when they see it. Finally, the kids discover a walled city at the base of a large hill. It's kind of a mess by real-world standards. There's a bunch of garbage and sewage piled up along the walls, but compared to some of the other places in Everworld, it may as well be Vegas. So our four approach the open city gates, where they are immediately swept up by a band of armed men on horses. Armed men with an odd emblem on their armor and really high-pitched voices. They look tough, but man, they sound like a bunch of NSYNC fans, Christopher said. Maybe some kind of interbreeding thing, you know, not entirely human, despite what they look like, Dave suggested. They're eunuchs, I said. They're what? Christopher demanded. The bloody knife on their breastplates? The jewels? It's a symbol. They're eunuchs. Castrated males. Oh, jeez, don't say that word. So this place is known simply as Her City, ruled by a mysterious unnamed matriarch. The occupants are a menagerie of Dungeons & Dragons races, with humans, elves, and dwarves hanging out in what, by all appearances, is a Renfest. A Renfest with a couple of rules. You have to enter unarmed, but unarmed of what is up to you. You want your sword? A man built like an SUV slammed his fist into the side of David's head. You want your sword? I will let you keep your sword. Only give me your jewels and I will let you keep your sword. The other guards all laughed uproariously at this, a chorus of massive, threatening schoolgirls. Yes, in her city, you either relinquish your weapons or your testicles. Yeah, it's not hard to imagine a lot of young male readers crossing their legs a lot when they got to this book. So the soldiers force our protagonist to relinquish their weapons except Galahad's sword, which is in David's possession. When one guy tries to take the sword by force, the hilt badly burns his hand. It turns out that there's some magic on the sword. Only our 4 protagonists can hold it, which means David gets to keep it while in her city. I'm not a fan of this plot point. With no foreshadowing of this magic, it feels less like a part of Everworld and more like the authors going, oh wait, shit, we need that sword in a later scene. How do we let David keep it? It couldn't have been that hard to have the soldiers take the sword and have our protagonist try to get it back. It would be a decent subplot and source of tension when the mysterious her shows up and our protagonists don't even have their magic sword to protect them. Instead, here's some convenient magic. This moment also really undermines the threat of the eunuch soldiers. First, they try once and just give up. Surely one of you could put on some gloves and see if that'll work. What about carrying it around with tongs? I'm pretty sure you have a couple of blacksmiths making all this custom armor for you. I'm sure he's got some large tongs. And if the magic still gets past that, well, why don't you just leave it on the ground? Seriously, nobody but these 4 can touch the thing. Just make sure they're separated from wherever it's laying. Second, I realize these guys think highly of their unnamed matriarch, but they clearly don't understand this sword's magics. They're putting their ruler in needless danger. If they thought she was invincible, they wouldn't be bothering with disarming these kids in the first place. So a magic sword is probably a thing to actually be worried about. Third, what happened to the threat of your weapons or your testicles? This isn't just an idle threat. There's an actual in-world reason for this exchange. You have to be either disarmed or castrated. David didn't give up his weapon, therefore these guys should be holding him down and warming up the carving knives. He has a magic sword. He doesn't have magic balls. There's nothing stopping these guys from making good with the threat. But David's like, I promise I won't hurt anybody with this sword. And they're all, well, all right. And that's it. The army of her city aren't nearly as threatening as they think they are. So our 4 protagonists are free to walk around the city at their own leisure with their magic sword. They learn of a cave at the base of the hill, and rumors abound of what's inside, including one rumor that anyone who manages to pass whatever horrors lie within may find a portal to anywhere, including the real world. It's just a bit of local legends, but it's the nearest thing our protagonists have had to a lead in a long, long time. Getting back home doesn't really resolve any of the problems in Everworld, and David is still pretty smitten with the idea of being Santa's savior in knight in shining armor. They decide to sleep on it, which means jumping back into their bodies in the real world, where we get a very freaky but interesting scene of Jalil dealing with compounding nightmares. It turns out he's asleep in the real world as well, and this is what happens when you cross over at that moment. I woke and found myself at my part-time job, Boston Market. I reached with the unconscious ease of long practice to snag a freshly cooked chicken with my tongs. I laid the knife's edge on the breastbone, ready to split it. I looked down and saw Santa's head glowing from the empty hole of the chicken's neck. Well, you get what you pay for at Boston Market. We get some light David Lynch imagery in that flashback I read to you earlier, which is weird and unsettling, but really just an appetizer for the main event. Jalil is woken up back in Everworld through commotions on the street. It seems the mysterious her has arrived, and everyone's panicking and boarding themselves up inside. You sure it's a she? I asked. All the eunuchs around here. It's a she, April said positively. Anyway, she called herself the Terror Queen. Could be a big, mean transvestite, Christopher said. Of course, she'd have to be a big, mean transvestite Loch Ness monster to really stand out in a crowd around here. Casual homophobia aside, if her turned out to be Trixie Mattel, I'd be handing out copies of this book to everybody. Okay, hold on to your butts, because if you thought the books have been shockingly adult so far, here comes the magic nude lady of death. The protagonists try to make a run for it in the night, but they catch sight of her and are immediately, well, see for yourself. I spun around and saw her. She glowed in the moonlight, but also from some deeper, inner light. She was huge, of course, maybe twice the height of a man, but beautiful beyond any beauty I'd ever imagined. I saw her only in profile, a lustrous blue-green eye, cascading black hair, skin so pale and translucent she might have been formed of the early morning sunlight. She was perfectly formed in every aspect. A long leg, bared by the slit of her flimsy, breeze-tossed, barely seen dress, a firm, inviting breast, taut, smooth flesh, perfect down to the shape of her ear, the fingers of her hand. Look, I'm not a prude. I have reviewed straight-up porn on this channel, but this is a Scholastic book with the phrase firm, inviting breast in it. Not exactly a phrase you'd find in any Clifford books. Adult sexual content is not a bad thing, but it is an exceptional thing for this publisher, and I would love to find out how exactly we got to this point. Did Animorphs give Applegrant enough weight to throw around to make Scholastics publish a book with nude women and threats of genital mutilation? If he had wanted to, could R.L. Stine have used his Goosebumps cred to get Scholastics to publish his gay erotica? Because that would have been amazing. But there's a flip side to her's appearance. Like, literally, the other side of her body. They only see her in profile at first, and the three boys are just overwhelmingly aroused and smitten with her. Then she turns to face them. The spun gossamer dress that had left me helpless with desire on her right side now revealed the vile detail of her left side. She was dead. She was death itself. Her flesh was the color of raw concrete, gray, ash, but with spots of color like bruises, yellow and green and purple. Her eye was an empty socket, dark as the cave she'd come from. The left side of her nose was eaten away, gnawed down to the cartilage. There was a rip in her cheek, revealing the rotting, gumless teeth in her mouth. Her tongue writhed with worms that lived within the dead flesh itself. Her left leg was formed like her right, her left breast like her right, but in a terrible time-lapse photo that showed the awful ravages of death and time. The worms ate at her, poked in and out of her flesh. Maggots formed foul pockets of feverish activity within her very flesh. Folds of skin hung loose where she had scraped through the narrow streets. So let's cut to the chase here. Lady Two-Face here is Hel, that is H-E-L, a goddess of Norse mythology, ruler of an underworld realm of death and another child of Loki. Look, college was a super frickin' weird time, okay? In mythology, she's described as being half black, half white, kind of like those race allegory aliens from Star Trek. But some artistic interpretations of her have translated that into half Norse beauty, half decaying zombie, which is taken to its extreme here with one half that causes uncontrollable lust in men and another half that disgusts and terrifies. Smartly, this effect is the result of magic. It's not a genuine reaction from Jalil, David, and Christopher. If that had not been the case, then we'd have a book where a woman provokes extreme reactions just by her physical appearance, which would be super mondo grosso. Which is not to say that sexual attraction doesn't play a part, because April is only partially affected by Hel's magic. She has an unsettled reaction, but isn't crippled in fear or lust by Hel's appearance, as April is presumably a straight woman. This is also why Hel's forces are eunuchs. The magic is tied to sexual drive, so in order to serve effectively, that sexual drive needs to be eliminated. Of course, that raises some questions. Are gay and bisexual women affected by Hel's spells? Are gay men or asexuals not affected? This is also why non-castrated people need to give up their weapons, so that the gross zombie side effect doesn't cause them to start swinging radically. Not that any of the weapons would hurt her, except David's magic sword that he still has. So now that Hel has her protagonist under her spell, what does she plan to do with them? What do I want? The creature pretended to consider. I want to lie with these three. I want them to pleasure me through the long, cold night. And when they have screamed and cried and obeyed my every whim, I will add their voices to the chorus of agony that lulls me to sleep each night. If you thought Everworld was going to stop being so gross and off-putting, welcome to the sexual violence book. Nothing but sexual violence all the time, every time. Come for the genital mutilations, stay for the women threatening to rape men. Watch as a teenage boy touches a teenage girl's boobs and is cured of his OCD. Everybody's getting inappropriately touched in Everworld. I'm not kidding. Scholastics went full-blown grindhouse with this shit. It's super weird. Hel isn't even that sexual in the mythology. She's just the keeper of the Norse underworld. This is something that Applegrant created for this book specifically. So the question is then, why? Why all this sexual violence? What does it serve the narrative? There was, of course, surprising amounts of extreme violence in Animorphs, but that could be said to serve the overarching themes of horrors of war. A lot of the weirder science fiction concepts raised in that series were metaphors of more human ideas. Here's some sci-fi chemical warfare to represent human chemical warfare. Here's some sci-fi drug addiction to represent human drug addiction. Oftentimes these parallels were recognized by the main characters, and they learned more about themselves from the contrast of these experiences. So, is the sexual violence here speaking to any larger themes? Besides, Everworld sucks, why would anyone live here? Not really, partially because Everworld hasn't really built a thesis statement for itself yet. Is there a real-world contrast? I mean, I guess you can say Hel is threatening our male protagonists with fantasy rape, but metaphor is often a matter of degree, and Hel threatening with magic instead of a knife to the throat doesn't seem like many degrees to me. Do the characters learn something from this? There have been threats of sexual violence in the previous 3 books. This is just that taken to 11. Maybe something could have been made of the sexual violence being aimed at the 3 male characters and not April, that men can be victims as well, but that's not in this book. There's no point where April is like, man, I still can't get over almost becoming a harem girl for the Aztecs, and Christopher's like, man up, or something, and then, whoops, how the tables have turned. Nothing like that. Nada. Nope. Sexual violence was only approached once in Animorphs, with the slightly over-the-top attempted rapist in number 2, The Visitor, which resulted in a disgusting moment of victim blaming. The sexual violence in this book is just for the sake of raising the stakes. It was done for the sake of, wow, Scholastics will let us do this now? Let's go all in. It's exploitation. Basically, Applegrant weren't all that great on the subject of sexual violence in their early works. Hel leads our 4 prisoners into the cave at the base of the hill and into her lair, where we learn a few plot points. First, she has Thor prisoner. Second, she's got a lot of slaves constructing new tunnels, in what turns out to be a turf war with the other underworld gods, like Hades, Haruman, and Ereshkigal. Oh my god, this is a horrible... You know me, you know I can't do this. Hey, that's a cool idea that explores what might happen when several ancient mythologies clash. Neato. Finally, we learn that Hal has Sena prisoner. She's dangling over a massive pit in the middle of Hel's throne room, in kind of a comatose state. Presumably, she gave our 4 protagonists up. Hel knew they were coming. So we get some extended pages of Hel continuing to psychologically torture the 3 boys, and you're just sitting there waiting for one of them to go, oh shit, right, we have a magic sword, let's try that. Since April's the one least affected by Hel's magic, she's the one who ends up attacking her, and Hel is like, oh no, not that sword that was clearly visible this entire time. It only really works on her not zombie side, but it's enough damage for our protagonist to make a run for it. Alas, the only place to run to is the giant 300 pit, but thankfully gravity inside the pit is on the fritz, and Jalil manages to grab and free Sena on the way down. And that's the end of the plot. The protagonists discover an evil, face it, and escape. It's not, however, the end of the book. We still have 9 more chapters, 63 more pages, where the protagonists walk through tunnels, not being actively pursued by Hel or her minions, but instead run into altogether unrelated conflicts. First, we have Jalil and Sena on their own, walking around and talking, Sena insisting she didn't give them up on purpose, that she was magically influenced, and Jalil finally presents his main character arc for the series. She has great powers, Santa said. Yeah? Well, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. Figure out how it works. I sounded ridiculous. I didn't care. What? What are you going to figure out? Magic. Everworld has held together for a long time. So, as weird as the rules may seem, there are rules. There is a system. There is software. You're pretty cocky for a guy sitting in the dark in the lowest circle of Hell's Kingdom. Not about cocky, I said softly. Humans lived for 1,000,000 years thinking the sun went around the earth, not knowing what caused diseases, not knowing why the wind blew or the rain fell. They called it all magic. Used to be 99% of everything was magic. Now we know. Ah, so you'll be the first scientist in Everworld, she said, mocking me. I was very gratified to hear annoyance in her voice. That's right, I thought. I will find the key to Hell, to Loki, to Merlin, and to you, Sena the Witch. I will find the key and open the software, and I will take this universe apart and lay all its pieces out for all to see and understand. Then everyone meets up and fights skeletons. Specifically skeletons led by a couple of Hetwan who are digging their own tunnels. I'm sure it's meant to be all Jason the Argonauts, but I'll admit I was a bit burned out at this point and the charm was lost on me. Then another one of the Hetwan's servants show up, a giant rodent monster whom the protagonists dub Ratfink. This thing is big enough to swallow each of them whole, and, well, what's a Kay Applegate series without a little vor? Something grabbed me, wrapped itself around me, a snake, a tongue. It pulled me down. Struggle, fight, but too weak. Down. No, no, no. Stop. Let me go. I can't die. I can't die. Wet flesh closed around me, smothered me as I gasped and choked and screamed in silence. Smothered. Couldn't move. Only twist as the throat turned me, rotated me down toward oblivion. My mouth was filled with the flesh of the creature, my hands glued to my sides. Muscles began to pummel me, beat me, break me up by shattering my bones, ripping cartilage from bone and flesh from cartilage. It was beginning to digest me. Well, Griffin McElroy just got a wicked boner. David ends up killing the Ratfink and cuts Jalil and April out, and that scene is over. There's some conversations in the tunnel, everyone's all tense about Sena, people don't entirely trust David because he may or may not still be under her spell, and then they run into a dragon's lair. A massive kaiju of a dragon called Nidhogger, and he's bummed. Somebody stole his treasure, specifically the 4 treasures of the Tuatha De Danann, a stone, a spear, a sword, and a cauldron. The dragon figures he can turn Sena into Loki, and Loki can get them back to him, but David offers to search for them instead. So, who stole these treasures? Leprechauns. They're always after his Lucky Charms. Follow-up. The irony of our 4 protagonists finding a purpose at the end of the 3rd book is that it results in them just kind of wandering from moment to moment in this book. Even if you're down for all the sexual violence, which I'll get back to, structurally this book is very meandering and unfocused. We open with a handful of moments that don't really lead into each other, the talking boar, the mysterious bridge, but they are tied thematically in showing how out of depth the protagonists are at simple things. I mean, how could they possibly handle hard things? It's a decent warm-up for a hard thing. And then there's a small plot at the core of this book where the characters are led around by the nose, don't really figure anything out themselves, and only manage to escape due to a major plot contrivance. And then you follow that up with a bunch of scenes that really don't have anything to do with anything. You could put them in any order and it wouldn't change anything. Structurally, this is the weakest book in the series we've covered thus far. The magic sword is an ass pull. The final 60 pages are just there, and the characters still lack agency in the plot despite last book's thesis statement. You can make the argument that it's not time for that because we need a good introduction book for Jalil, and the character stuff is admittedly the best part, but we're a third of the way through the series. It's time for things to come together. Jalil is a more likable main character than Christopher or David. It's nice that he has the secondary motivation of trying to figure out Everworld scientifically on top of the whole not dying thing. Though the whole OCD thing is presented a bit monolithic as far as character flaws go, it seems like a decent representation of people with OCD, at least as far as I can tell, but it was never hinted at in the previous 3 books, and feels like it was introduced rather quickly. Like, David has a flawed idea of masculinity due to a culture that values this masculine idea. Christopher's hateful humor is a coping mechanism to a complicated and difficult family life. April has a rivalry with Santa due to their personal history. Jaleel just has a mental illness. That's his baggage. Yes, you can just have a mental illness, but when it's all the flaw a character has, you end up with a direct correlation. Good representation or not, Jaleel's characterization feels cheaper than the other 3. And this book is just gross. Just gross in a much more focused way. Threats of rape, genital mutilation, supernatural lust. It's implied that Santa temporarily cures Jaleel's OCD by having him touch one of her R-rated bits. This book is abundantly, negatively sexual. There's no after-school special idea to warrant it. This isn't some poorly thought out metaphor about the dangers of premarital sex or STDs. This is a far cry from It Follows. It's just, here's a bunch of sexual violence. Look how edgy we are. It doesn't mean anything thematically, it doesn't suggest anything about the characters or the setting, it's just there for its own sake. Gratuitous. Yeah, it does its job in shocking the reader, but that just means that it has all the value of a jump scare. And I know from their other writings that Apple Grant is better than that. Everworld number 4, Realm of the Reaper, is not a book I would ever return to for its own sake. It values shock over telling a story well, which is unfortunate considering how intertwined all these books are. Unlike Animorphs, you can't really skip any or risk missing important plot stuff. But if this book sounds gross and bad, I humbly offer up this review as an alternative to reading it, which, basically means I'm a superhero. You're welcome.